Golden State Media Concepts social media podcast. Time to hashtag everything with
Mariano
and Pauline.
Hashtag Pauliano. We talk about all the fun, crazy stories on social media, from Instagram to Facebook, Twitter to Tumblr, or probably even Friendster. Join us each week as we explore the quirky side of social media. It's the Golden State Media Concepts social media podcast.
It's simple, such a sad song. The one that we rely on to get us.
Welcome to the GSMC Social Media News Podcast, brought to you by GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Stacy.
And I am your other host, Sarah. It's good to see you, Stacy. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. Ready to talk about some social media news?
Yes, and I'm resisting the urge to just yell Dilly Dilly randomly, just because I love this story so much.
I didn't even know that phrase. I didn't know where it came from. I was telling you earlier that we don't watch a lot of regular television in my house, so I don't see a lot of commercials. So my husband and I didn't know about this until Mike and Mike, it's not Mike and Mike anymore, it's Golic and Wingo. And they just kept randomly throwing this phrase out, Dilly Dilly. Dilly Dilly. And we were like, where is that? So I Googled it and then saw the commercials and figured out where, but yeah, I mean, there is actually a story behind it I was happy to know, but
yeah,
when you just start hearing it randomly in a ESPN show, you're like, what the heck?
Yeah, so I actually didn't really know it was anything either, because I also don't really watch TV or sports, but I did end up watching the Super Bowl with my family and saw the commercial and thought that the commercial itself must be referencing something else. I was like, what is Dilly Dilly? I don't understand. I kind of like this, but what is Dilly Dilly?
Right.
So for those who don't understand what we're talking about, Dilly Dilly is a phrase that has showed up in Budweiser beer commercials this past football season. They've set it up and it's sort of like a Middle Ages time period. And so they're yelling. The one I saw at the Super Bowl it's sort of their battle cry as they go and fight the bigger, stronger army, because they've got the Budweiser and we want it.
Right.
So we must go and challenge them, Dilly Dilly.
And I read an article with the creators of this commercial, and they said they were trying to think of something that was like, make it so, or you know, something along those lines. And he just wrote the phrase Dilly Dilly in his notes as a placeholder, but then it actually came to pass that was the phrase they used. So
yes.
Dilly Dilly.
And I totally get why people would yell this out, because again, I really do want to myself, and I don't really drink beer. But at the Masters, security was given a list of phrases people were not allowed to yell, and if they did yell, they must be escorted off immediately, one of which was Dilly Dilly.
Are you even allowed to yell in golf? I thought
I didn't
because the commentators are like somewhere else and they speak in whispers.
Right, and I thought this is why I don't like golf, because I thought it was so boring. Is you stand there quietly as people look really, really serious as they're about to do something that I couldn't even begin to explain why this does or does not work well.
Physics.
Wait, isn't it just you're quiet and then they hit it and then you clap politely?
Do the little golf clap, right?
And then move on. But evidently this has become a problem in the past couple of seasons or so with people yelling out things.
Well, I heard something about, you know, that they're drinking while they're doing this, because what else are you going to do while you stand in the sun for 92 hours?
So that's part of the problem, is that people are drinking and getting a little drunk and deciding to be a little rowdy and yelling different things out. And of course, Dilly Dilly was just so perfect for that. So of course people did that. And the, people who put on the Masters were like, yeah, we're not going to do that. So they put out this list of things you're not allowed to yell or you will get kicked out. And somehow, someone got a hold of that and it became this media thing. And Budweiser just handled this so well. Like, I think whoever came up with this at Budweiser kind of deserves a raise. Because they put out on their website, and it's made to look like a scroll or something that you would need like a town crier to read out for you. And so they put out, we've heard about this thing that I think they call them like the guards of the green jacket. So it gives them some silly name, won't allow. And except for ourselves, we don't go for tyranny, so we are going to give out 1,000 t-shirts to people at the Masters with Dilly Dilly on it. So even if you can't say Dilly Dilly,
right, you can still express it.
Oh, I thought that was so well played, Budweiser.
It's not often that I say well played in terms of,
golf
or beer. I mean,
right.
and that's just my personal preference. I don't really like beer, but nothing against Budweiser, although they generally have pretty good commercials at the Super Bowl.
Yeah, their Super Bowl commercials are pretty awesome.
So somebody at Budweiser has got a creative mind.
Yes. But just the fact that the Masters people were like, this is a serious enough thing that we have to give this list to our security. Dilly Dilly is forbidden. It's just like, really?
Did you see the list? What other things were on there? Anything else interesting? I mean,
I didn't see the list, no. The article only talked about this because Budweiser, again, handled it so well.
Right.
I do remember they did mention that someone had yelled out one of the golfer's wife's names as he teed up.
Oh, jeez.
Which I'm just like, so I hope you really are kind of drunk, because otherwise that's just a really jerky move to do. Like, A, why are you yelling when anyone's teeing off?
I was just going to say, yeah.
Teeing off. Clearly, I don't play golf.
Getting ready to hit that little ball thingy.
B, like, yelling out their wife is only, like, a slight step up from just, yelling out your mama or something as they're teeing off. Like, you're really trying to start a fight here, clearly. Like, what are you doing?
And I tend to think of golf fans as a certain type of person. I don't necessarily think of them as rowdy drunks.
Right.
I mean, I do get that you are walking around in the sun all day and maybe you're imbibing, which would make you drunk, but I don't tend to think of them as like, that's more of a, I don't know, football fan or something.
Yeah, like golf and tennis for me were the two sports that seem just sort of most boring to be a spectator in. It's like you just sit quietly and then do that little polite clap and then sit or stand, I guess if you're on a golf course, quietly. Maybe, if you're following a certain player, walk silently with them as they progress throughout the course.
Right.
And that's all you do, isn't it? Like,
I don't know. I mean, that's the way I perceive it.
Right.
I've never been to a golf tournament of any kind.
Yeah, I remember when I had to do golf in high school as part of, like, we did a different sport each month for PE. And I just remember thinking, wait, why golf? Isn't that just something retired people do? Is this really like any sort of aerobic activity? Like,
well, if you walk the course, it's good exercise that way, especially if you carry your own clubs. But I don't know if between golf carts and caddies, I don't know how many people get that much exercise.
I mean, I know there's you have to do it with proper form, and that can be hard to do.
Right.
But I mean, when I did it in high school, we clearly weren't walking on an 18-hole golf course, so we didn't get that much exercise. But yeah, golf always has this very sort of serene, staid sort of feel to it in my head. So I love the fact that Dilly Dilly is sort of making this relevant in the mainstream conversation, and just clearly they're trying to liven it up a bit. Yeah. Maybe they should start dressing up in medieval. You could combine Renaissance fair with golf tournament. Or, I mean, because isn't golf originally Scottish or something? Yes. So we should all be wearing like 1800s Scottish wear and kilts, and that would be interesting. That would be fun and better. I mean, golf outfits have gotten better with the polo shirts as opposed to like the knickers and the I'd actually like sweater to go back vest. To the knickers. I think that would be fun. Visually, it is very interesting. They're just some crazy, like the hats with the little ball on top, and just I don't know. But I think it's kind of annoying that the Masters people decided to just ban words as opposed to. Why wouldn't you just make it anyone who yells when they're teeing off, because that can obviously affect their game or whatever. Right. But I think it would be really fun if oh hey, someone got a really good hole-in-one or under par, or again, can you tell I don't play golf? Someone did something really cool in the golf playing method and to shout Dilly Dilly as like a cheer for that. Sure. Once you've hit the ball, you don't really, I mean, obviously they're concentrating on watching the ball land, but you don't need that level of mental concentration that you need when you're setting up the shot. And if you're allowed to clap, shouldn't that also be a time when you can Dilly Dilly or huzzah or whatever your cheer of choice is? Right. I would think so. But again, here we are, two girls who don't really know much about golf, just being like, maybe we should do this. Right. Let's change it up. We don't know anything about it, but we're completely changing the rules. Which says, if you are a fan of golf and you are listening to this podcast, we apologize. We do apologize, but also we would like to know more. So go on social media and tell us
be nice. I mean, we're not asking for you to like troll us or anything, but just tell us like what are the rules? What are we missing?
Why can't you yell dilly dilly or other things at golf? Since
after you're right.
Yeah,
we understand
since you can
why.
clap, why can't you dilly dilly as well?
Yes.
So yes, hit us up for that. Anyways, we're going to take a short break here. When we get back, we're going to be talking about something not as upbeat as Dilly Dilly, but still a really good story. So stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Social Media News Podcast.
Always on the go, but the day just won't be one without your Hollywood fix. Let Golden State Media Concepts Entertainment Podcast take care of that. Jordan and Keith is Entertainment Tonight meets Access Hollywood.
I'm Jordan. The guy laughing, that's Keith.
Yeah, I'm Keith.
An all-inclusive look of pop culture.
Welcome back to the GSMC Social Media News Podcast. And today we're talking about a whole assortment of things. And so this next thing I thought was really, I want to say brave, but at the same time, I kind of feel like we shouldn't have to say brave about this, which is Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson gave an interview with Express where he talked about his depression and his struggles with it. And how, depression doesn't discriminate, and how guys especially tend to not talk about depression, which is true.
Right.
Because, guys have the whole social construct of, guys don't talk about their feelings and or have feelings.
Yeah.
So,
and then, if you express any kind of feelings, then words like pussy get thrown around. Pardon my language, folks, but, that's just the way men tend to, buck up.
Right. Be a man.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and this was actually very interesting because clearly he's been dealing with this for a while, because he says it developed when he was 23 and he wanted to play professional football, but then he was injured and so he couldn't. And, if that's what you've been wanting to do for so long, that's like your whole life's thought is, I'm going to go play professional football. And now it's like, you can't,
right.
That completely throws your whole world off. And then also his mother, when he was a teenager, tried to kill herself.
Yes.
And so, and depression can be
genetic. Yeah.
So clearly there's something in the family there, but just the fact that he was willing to talk about this, and interestingly, his mother doesn't actually have recollection of her suicide attempt.
Oh, wow.
So having to deal with that of, I remember this really terrible thing that you don't remember, and I'm also not feeling okay. And just the fact that he has, not only opened in this interview, but gone out and seeked counseling and, not tried to just hide it or bury it or anything, but really dealt with this.
Right. And if we can call anyone kind of a paragon of masculinity, I would think it would be Dwayne Johnson, because he's always working out. His diet and exercise routine is crazy.
Yes.
As are his cheat days. Have you ever seen what the man eats on a cheat day? Where some of us might, he doesn't necessarily eat it all, but he orders like numerous pizzas, and he has pancakes in the morning, and his cheat day. I think there's a YouTube video. You should look it up. It's incredible what he allows himself on the cheat day. It makes me kind of want to throw up just thinking about it.
Oh, man. But I'm really glad that he got a really, really good response for this. A lot of people, reached out to him on Twitter and were like, thank you so much for opening up about this. And that's helped me to open up about it, or it helps me to, feel like, okay, there is hope, even if I feel hopeless in this moment, that it's okay to, it's possible to manage this, I guess I should say.
Yes. And that's what we need. We need more people who, because there is such a stigma about it. And
really
it's crazy in this day and age that there's still that stigma regarding mental illness of any kind. It is a chemical imbalance in your brain, and it's not. I know one person who gets so frustrated with a relative of hers who's bipolar. She says there's no such thing as being bipolar. It's just an excuse for adults to have temper tantrums.
Wow.
Which is so not true. If you and if you go off your meds, and there's just all sorts of factors that we have to understand. And if you just refuse to even look at it as something medical or something chemical, if you just say it's a temper tantrum, you're never going to understand
Right,
what's going
yeah.
on. Or, when people are depressed, then other people who've never had that level of depression might just say, "Oh, just think happy thoughts."
Right, just
or
cheer up.
Just cheer up. Yeah. Just get up and exercise.
Right.
Well, yeah. I mean, the exercise does help with depression, but when you're that depressed, getting up to exercise is
So
almost
getting up is thing.
impossible.
Like, even just getting out of bed in the morning is really hard for people who have depression.
Yes. So thank you, Dwayne Johnson, for opening up about that. I mean, that's amazing.
I think also the problem that we have in our society with depression is either we don't talk about it or it's sort of romanticized not to seek treatment. Like you think of like the tortured artist or
Right.
whatever. And it's like, oh, that helps with your creativity or your gift or whatever. And you don't want to seek treatment for it that way. Like it's not even so much, I mean, it's equally having the depression, but also if you have depression, actually doing something about it is also people look down on you for.
Yes.
Like it's not just bad enough that, you already have this thing you're dealing with and you really don't feel well, but then people A, either say, just get up or whatever, but then B, if you are actually trying to deal with it medically, then you're not shunned per se, but definitely.
But people can, there's still, again, a stigma around
Right.
seeking counseling,
Yes.
I'll hear people say, I'm not crazy.
Right,
I don't need to go to
yes.
counseling.
Yeah.
Well, that's not really what it's about,
Right.
or they picture lying on a couch with some guy with a clipboard talking like Freud,
Yes.
and it's really not that. It's just a way of getting out of your own head
Yes.
and talking to another person who is trained to help you rethink things or give you coping mechanisms to deal with what happens in your brain when you're going through depression.
Like, I think some people have this idea that if you're not, I'm going to use the word crazy, and I apologize for that, crazy enough to, like, have to go to it's not called an asylum anymore, I don't think. But, like...
but there are mental health facilities,
Yes.
and you can be committed.
Yeah, if
Even
you're not
if it's
crazy
just a hospital.
enough, if you're not crazy enough where you have to be committed, then you should be fine. Like, there's not really anything in the middle. Like, if I'm not crazy, I should be good.
Right.
And that's not quite how that works. Like, you can, not need to be committed, but at the same time really be dealing with a whole bunch of stuff.
And it can be hard depending on what kind of insurance you have and what kind of a medical plan you have. It can be
Right.
really hard to even get help or know where to get help, and if you
Yes.
have a doctor who doesn't necessarily, they might just put you on drugs. Well, you're feeling depressed. Here's
Right.
this drug, which can help, but it doesn't always help you to find the root of the problem, and to deal with
Yes.
those emotions that come with that and all of those other things. So yeah, it's crazy that in this day and age, we still have such a mental block against
Yes.
mental illness.
And I mean, I think part of it is just not old habits, old thoughts die hard, sort of. Like, this is how it's been viewed for decades and decades and maybe even centuries. And even with, Freud and psychoanalysts, that only came about in the past century or so.
Right.
So, and even like the way you would have thought about depression 100 years ago is most definitely not the way you would have thought about depression now, even if you were a medical professional at that time.
Right.
So as they're going along, doctors and scientists still don't understand the full reason for depression and why exactly it works, which is why there are, a number of different antidepressants that do different things chemically, because for some people this chemical might work, but for other people that chemical might work, and they don't really know a way to test specifically which chemical would be best for which person.
Right.
So it is a bit of a trial if you have depression to be like, okay, try this one. We'll try this for a while. Did that not work? Okay, we'll try this other one.
Right.
And trying to figure out what the proper dosage is and the proper mix of multiple
And
medications.
if you have depression plus anxiety, you
Right.
could be bipolar, you could, I
Right.
mean, there's
There's
so
several different
much.
ways that depression is categorized.
Yes. And so, yeah, that's
Sorry to sound so down there, but it's really good that The Rock has, felt brave enough to come out and talk about this and
I
not felt
agree.
that he needed to hide, and that he got such a strong response showing that there are many people who deal with this and also feel, possibly that if they spoke about it, people would look at them differently. And so being able to
Yes.
see oh no, it's okay, and it is actually a sign of strength to be able to talk about your depression, I think is really helpful.
Yes, I agree. I think he's very high on my list of people I would want to sit down and have a beer with, except that I don't drink beer, but you know what I mean. Sit down and have a drink with, just because he just seems hilarious and down to earth, and
very down to earth. Yeah.
So
to the rock, Dilly Dilly. Sorry, I could not help myself. We're going to take another short break, and when we come back, we will be talking about another D word, a devil. So stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Social Media News Podcast.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the GSMC Social Media News Podcast. And today, this wasn't planned, but our theme evidently seems to be things that start with a D.
Yes.
So our first story was about Dilly Dilly, and our second story was about depression, and our third story is somewhat indirectly about the Devil Wears Prada, because there is now many rumors that Anna Wintour, who is the sort of Devil Wears Prada was basically based off of her, may actually be leaving Vogue after 30 years.
that is crazy. I don't even know what Vogue without Anna Wintour looks like.
I actually can't either, because that's more years than I've been alive. So.
Yes, it is. I just, this has nothing to do with her leaving Vogue, but the symmetricalness of her hair is amazing to me. Does she get it cut like every day? It's just so wow, straight and fascinating.
Well, and I mean, and I'm not a big fashion person, so I haven't read Vogue too much, but she sounds like a fascinating person, and especially if you've seen Devil Wears Prada, Meryl Streep's great performance as Miranda Priestley, who's, you know, very, very fashionable, obviously, but also very harsh and demanding and clever in a almost insidious way.
Yes.
Like, and the queen almost of this magazine. It's not an empire, because that's a whole nother thing, but the queen almost of her office. Obviously, you see the scene where she's about to arrive and there's like, gird your loins. Like, we're all terrified of this woman.
Yes.
This one woman coming in, and she like crushes people just with a word or with a look.
Yeah.
And that evidently was what Anna Wintour could be like at times.
Right. Yeah. I don't really know much about her. I also don't read Vogue much. I mean, it weighs like 20 pounds.
Yeah.
So it's just never something that I really got into. But I do see her on social media a lot of people posting stories about her or what she's wearing, or, you know, when she's at Fashion Week, etc. And she always has those giant sunglasses on.
Yes.
So it's weird to see her without them.
Right.
You know, almost like they're her shield.
But I think it's interesting. These rumors have been very strong, even though Condé Nast, who puts out Vogue, has totally denied that this is the case. But the rumors are that she might be leaving in July after the wedding of her daughter. And it's been 30 years, which is, you know, sort of a nice big round number.
Right.
And several other big name editors have left in recent years, including the editor of British Vogue, which is where Anna Wintour evidently started and maybe was kind of her rival, kind of not. So that also seems to give it credence that it you know, it's a good timing for her, and her daughter's going to get married, and it's just a nice number, and she outlasted all these other people. But we're seeing this sort of turning over of the editorial old guard, if you will. So maybe it's just her time.
Right. And in 30 years, think of how much the publishing world has changed.
And the fashion world,
in the
too.
fashion world, yeah. So, you know, again, we just spent last episode talking about checking your sources, people.
Right.
And so we're not saying that she definitely is, but we are saying we could understand timing-wise why that might be a decision she would make.
Yes.
Yeah.
And also that evidently her longtime supporter and the chairman of Condé Nast passed away last October. So maybe she also just feels it's time, even though nobody has confirmed this. This is all just totally rumors.
Right.
And these rumors have happened before for many years, because again, after 30 years, you know, this has definitely come up before. But given the timing of things, it seems a bit more possible now.
Right. But it'll be interesting to see who if it's true, and she will retire eventually, or die. I mean, you know, one of those things will happen. I'm not saying I want her gone, but you know, it's just inevitable. And it'll be interesting to see who they get to replace her, and how things change, and what kind of different vision that person has, if it's a man or a woman. I mean,
well, and I liked all the memes and things where people were talking about they should totally give it to Nigel. Nigel's earned his chance from Devil Wears Prada, and I was just like, yes, but not real,
right?
But still, yes.
Right. He's fictional, people.
Speaking of fiction.
Yes.
Did you see my segue? Right. So I also really love this this Twitter challenge of women describing themselves as male authors would. So when I first heard about this, I was like, the way it had been titled, I didn't quite understand what it was talking about until I looked it up. I thought it was something, So anyways, so what it was a woman was reading a Twitter conversation about own voices.
Sorry, I was just rereading the notes, and I apologize. I just started to giggle because of the notes.
It's really it's funny when you hear it. So a woman on Twitter in the Own Voices conversation, which is about books being written by people who are very similar to the character, like a book about a woman being written by a woman, a book about a Muslim being written by a Muslim, etc.
Right.
Came across a male author who didn't understand why this was a thing and insisted he could write a woman character as well as a woman could.
Okay.
So he posted this on Twitter because he was so sure he could do it, and this woman, Gwen Katz, who first discovered this, passed it on. So his is interesting, so I'll just read it out. Again, remember, he's describing this woman as her. She's the main character, so it's his writing, but she's speaking in first person.
Right. And there is a difference. Let's just say there is a difference between your main character being someone who looks like you or looks very different than you, and like secondary characters, because obviously all authors are going to have secondary characters that don't necessarily look like them. So I just thought I'd throw that in there. Please read.
Okay. So I sauntered over, certain he noticed me. I'm hard to miss, I'd like to think. A little tall, but not too tall. A nice set of curves, if I do say so myself. Pants so impossibly tight that if I had a credit card in my back pocket, you could read the expiration date. The rest of my outfit wasn't that remarkable, just a few old things I had lying around. You know how it is.
Yeah, you know how it is, Stacey.
Except my first response is no. I've never thought of myself in that way at all. And I don't know any woman who would think of herself that way.
It's yes.
Like and maybe it's because I'm me, and in my first person, I don't really ever feel the need to think about or describe my appearance in that way. Right. But also, I don't know that I would ever think about, if I had jeans on so tight you could read my credit card through my back pocket.
Right.
Which is and
isn't that more of an 80s thing anyway? I mean, that used to kind of be a thing. Your jeans so tight. I mean, it really was a
turn
thing.
of the 21st century thing too, I remember.
Yeah.
But just the fact that this feels very much, if this was third person, it would kind of make sense, because it feels very much like looking at it from an outside perspective.
Right.
But women were like, yeah, no, women don't describe themselves this way. So Whitney Reynolds, who hosts a different podcast, not on the GSMC podcast network, she hosts a totally different podcast on her own, decided to put this on Twitter as a challenge. Describe yourself the way a male author would.
Can I please read this?
Go ahead. The responses are great. Just go ahead.
She slid her legs into skin-tight jeans, the better to flaunt their leg-like shape, and strode down a corridor, walking on her legs, which were long. Wow, she thought, my legs are so long. Her breasts jounced their agreement.
Oh my gosh. I mean, oh man, yeah, women on Twitter really took to this in some of the best snarky ways possible. Just
yes. Well, it's kind of like when you have conversations with your male friends who say things like, don't you just play with your breasts all the time? Like, if you don't own them, you don't understand them. You know, I don't own a penis, so I don't necessarily understand what goes on with that.
Right.
And it's like, well, no, they're on my body, so I'm not as fascinated with them as you might be.
Yeah.
Right?
I'm totally used to this. This is not something I feel the need to notice all the time. And we're not saying, of course, that, you know, guys can't describe women, because there have been male authors who have written good female characters.
Yes.
But just the fact that clearly Own Voices, you know, was a conversation that people have felt needed to be had for many, many, many years. Mm-hmm. And this author decided, you know what, no, Own Voices is not necessary at all. I can do this and I'll prove it. And women were like, no, you really can't.
But to fail so spectacularly
he was
at
so
it,
proud of himself.
That is impressive.
I mean, I got to read this other one because
yes, please.
I loved it. It was so funny. She referenced a universally supported legal concept in a political discussion, but due to the nature of her gender, I felt compelled to ensure she understood the concept she was referencing, and I did so by rephrasing in a corrective tone what she literally just said.
Wow, that is like the very definition of mansplaining.
Right? It's like it's the author. The author who started this whole thing. It's just like, wow. I mean, yeah. Women on Twitter were wonderfully snarky about this, and some of these things are great to read, so you guys should definitely check them out if you're interested.
Yes.
But anyways, ending on that wonderfully hilarious and snarky note, that's all we have time for today. Tune in next time. You've been listening to the GSMC Social Media News Podcast.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Social Media Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.